Alexandra Morgan stood at the entrance of St. Mary's Hospital, her hands trembling as she clutched her resignation letter. After 5 years as a dedicated nurse, she was being forced to leave the job she loved. The hospital's new owner, billionaire James Harrison, had decided to restructure the facility, effectively pushing out longtime staff members like her. The autumn wind whipped around her as she watched expensive cars pull into the parking lot. Today was the day James Harrison would officially take over, and rumors spread that he planned to transform the community hospital into a luxury medical center. "Alex, are you really going through with this?" Sarah, her best friend and fellow nurse, approached with concern in her eyes. "I have to," Alexandra replied, straightening her shoulders. "Someone needs to tell him what this hospital means to our community." Instead of joining the other staff members in the conference room, Alexandra made her way to the executive floor. She had never been one to back down from a fight, and she wasn't about to start now. The new executive office was already transformed, all warm woods and sleek metals replacing the modest furnishings of the previous administration. A stern-looking secretary eyed her suspiciously. "Mr. Harrison isn't taking any appointments today," she said dismissively. "We'll want to see this," Alexandra insisted, holding up her resignation letter. "It's about his restructuring plan." Before the secretary could protest further, the office door opened. James Harrison emerged, and Alexandra's breath caught in her throat. The man before her was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with sharp features and penetrating gray eyes. His tailored suit probably cost more than her monthly salary. "What's this about my restructuring plan?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of giving orders. Alexandra stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Alexandra Morgan, head nurse of the pediatric ward. We need to talk about what you're doing to this hospital." James raised an eyebrow, looking more amused than concerned. "Do we now?" He gestured toward his office. "Please, enlighten me." The office was immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. James sat behind his massive desk while Alexandra remained standing, refusing to be intimidated. "This hospital serves thousands of people in this community," she began. "Many of them can't afford private health care. Your plan to turn it into a luxury facility will leave them with nowhere to go." "Business is business, Ms. Morgan," James replied coolly. "This hospital has been losing money for years. I'm simply making it viable." "By throwing out patients who can't pay?" Alexandra's voice rose with anger. "Huh. By firing staff who've dedicated their lives to helping others?" James leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "You seem very passionate about this. Tell me, what would you have me do? Continue running a failing institution?" "I would have you remember that healthcare isn't just about profit margins," Alexandra shot back. "It's about people's lives." She placed her resignation letter on his desk. "I won't be part of turning this place into a playground for the wealthy. But before I go, I want you to come with me. See the people you're affecting with your decisions." James looked at the letter, then back at her. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, or challenge. "You want me to tour the hospital with you?" "Yes," Alexandra replied firmly. "1 hour, that's all I ask. Then you can go ahead with your plans, knowing exactly what you're destroying." James stood, buttoning his jacket. "Ms. Morgan, I've reviewed every detail of this facility's operations. I doubt you'll show me anything I don't already know. Numbers on paper are different from real people, Mr. Harrison. Or are you afraid to face them?" The challenge in her words hit its mark. James's jaw tightened, but he nodded. 1 hour, then we discuss your resignation." As they left his office, Alexandra felt a mix of triumph and trepidation. She had one chance to show this man the heart of St. Mary's Hospital. One chance to save everything she and her colleagues had built. Little did she know, this hour would change not only the fate of the hospital, but her life as well. As they walked toward the pediatric ward, neither of them could have predicted the journey they were about to begin. As Alexandra led James through the hospital corridors, she could feel the tension radiating from him. His presence drew stares from staff and patients alike. Everyone knew who he was and what his arrival meant. "Our first stop is the pediatric ward," Alexandra announced, swiping her ID card. The doors opened to reveal a brightly painted hallway decorated with children's artwork. "Leo, come say hello," she called to a small boy sitting in a wheelchair near the nurse's station. The child, no more than 7, wheeled himself over with practiced ease. "Hi, Miss Alex," Leo beamed, his bald head testament to his ongoing chemotherapy. "Is this your friend?" James shifted uncomfortably as Alexandra introduced him. "This is Mr. Harrison. He's visiting our hospital today." Leo extended his small hand solemnly. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harrison. Are you going to help make our hospital better? It's Harrison." The question seemed to catch James off guard. He hesitated before shaking the boy's hand. "That's the plan," he replied neutrally. "Good, because Miss Alex says we need new games for the playroom. The old ones are boring now." Alexandra watched as James knelt to Leo's level, his expensive suit touching the linoleum floor. "What kind of games do you like?" "Video games, but we only have really old ones. And some of the controllers don't work anymore." Before James could respond, a commotion erupted down the hall. A young girl was having a seizure, and Alexandra immediately sprang into action. "Stay with Leo," she commanded James, rushing to help her colleagues. James stood frozen, watching as Alexandra and the other nurses worked with practiced efficiency. Their movements were synchronized, confident, as they stabilized the young patient. "Don't worry," Leo said, patting James's hand. "Miss Alex is the best nurse ever. She always knows what to do." 20 minutes later, Alexandra returned, looking slightly disheveled but professional. "Sorry about that. Sarah will take over now." As they continued their tour, James spoke quietly. "You handled that situation well." "It's my job," Alexandra replied. "Every person here is trained to handle emergencies. We're understaffed, but we make it work." They visited more departments: the emergency room, the maternity ward, the rehabilitation center. Everywhere they went, Alexandra knew every patient's name, their stories, their struggles. "Mrs. Chen here walked for the first time in 6 months yesterday," she explained, greeting an elderly woman in physical therapy. "Her insurance wouldn't cover extended rehabilitation, but we found a way to help." "By operating at a loss," James interjected. "By being human," Alexandra corrected. "Sometimes that means finding creative solutions." As their hour drew to a close, Alexandra saved the most important stop for last: the neonatal intensive care unit. "This is where I started my career," she said softly, leading him to an incubator where a tiny baby lay sleeping. "This is Emma. She was born at 24 weeks, weighing less than 2 pounds. Her mother died during childbirth, and her father works 3 jobs to pay the medical bills." James stared at the infant, his expression unreadable. "Spencer's point, Ms. Morgan. My point is that every number in your spreadsheets represents a life. Emma's father couldn't afford a private hospital. Without St. Mary's, she wouldn't have survived." Alexandra stepped closer to him, her voice intense. "You have the power to help people like Emma, Mr. Harrison. Instead, you're choosing to shut them out." James turned to face her, their proximity suddenly apparent. "And what about the hospital's sustainability? Should we let the entire facility fail? There are other solutions, if you'd bother to look for them." Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with something beyond their argument. For a moment, James seemed to see past her professional exterior, and Alexandra glimpsed vulnerability behind his cold facade. The spell was broken by a nurse calling Alexandra's name. Another emergency required her attention. "Our hour is up, Mr. Harrison," she said, stepping back. "You've seen what you came to see. The decision is yours." As she turned to leave, James caught her arm. "Wait. Meet me in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. "Why?" "Because, Ms. Morgan, you've made your point. Now I want to hear these solutions you claim exist." Alexandra nodded slowly. 9 o'clock then. Don't be late." As she hurried to respond to the emergency, Alexandra couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted during their tour. She had meant to show James Harrison the heart of St. Mary's Hospital, but somehow he had seen something in her as well. The question was, would it be enough to change his mind? The next morning, Alexandra arrived at James's office precisely at 9, wearing her best professional attire. She had spent most of the night preparing her presentation, gathering data and potential solutions. "Mr. Harrison will see you now," the secretary announced, her tone noticeably warmer than yesterday. James stood as Alexandra entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Coffee?" he offered. "No, thank you. I've had enough to keep me awake for days." The words slipped out before she could stop them. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Long night?" "I wanted to be prepared." Alexandra opened her laptop, pulling up her presentation. I have some proposals for how we can make St. Mary's financially viable while maintaining its community service mission. For the next hour, she outlined her ideas. Partnerships with local businesses, grant opportunities, restructuring administrative costs without sacrificing patient care. James listened intently, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed his business acumen. "Your proposals are interesting," he said finally, "but they rely heavily on community support and uncertain funding sources." "Because that's what this hospital is about, community," Alexandra insisted. "We're not just a business, Mr. Harrison. We're part of people's lives." James stood, walking to the window. "Tell me, Miss Morgan, why do you care so much? There are other hospitals that would hire you in an instant." Alexandra joined him at the window, watching the morning traffic below. "When I was 16, my little brother got sick. Really sick. We didn't have insurance and no private hospital would take him. St. Mary's saved his life." She turned to face him. "That's why I became a nurse. That's why I fight so hard for this place. Every day we give people hope when they have nowhere else to turn." James studied her face, something shifting in his expression. "What happened to your brother?" "He's in medical school now." Alexandra smiled. "He wants to work here someday." Before James could respond, his phone buzzed. "Excuse me," he said, checking the message. His face darkened. "There's an emergency board meeting. We'll have to continue this discussion later." "Mr. Harrison." "James," he corrected. "And don't worry, Ms. Morgan. I'm not making any decisions about the hospital today." "Alexandra," she offered in return. "Or Alex." As she gathered her things to leave, James spoke again. "Have dinner with me tonight." Alexandra froze. "Excuse me?" "To discuss your proposals further," he added quickly. "There's a restaurant near here, La Maison, 8 o'clock?" She should say no. Having dinner with the man who might destroy everything she cared about was a terrible idea, but something in his eyes made her hesitate. "Just dinner," she said firmly, "to discuss the hospital." "Just dinner," he agreed, though his smile suggested otherwise. Throughout her shift that day, Alexandra couldn't focus. Her colleagues noticed her distraction, especially Sarah. "Spill it," Sarah demanded during their lunch break. "What happened in that meeting?" "Nothing happened," Alexandra insisted. "We discussed my proposals for saving the hospital." "And?" "And he asked me to dinner to continue the discussion." Sarah's eyes widened. "James Harrison asked you on a date?" "It's not a date," Alexandra protested. "It's a business dinner." "At Les Maisons?" "Alex, that's the most exclusive restaurant in the city." "Trust me, it's a date." Alexandra buried her face in her hands. "What am I doing, Sarah? This man could destroy everything we've worked for." "Or maybe you're getting through to him," Sarah suggested. "You have a way of making people see things differently." "He's still a businessman. His priority is profit." "People can surprise you," Sarah smiled. "Just be careful, okay?" As her shift ended, Alexandra's nervousness grew. She rushed home to change, choosing a simple black dress that she hoped struck the right balance between professional and elegant. At precisely 8 o'clock, she arrived at La Maison. James was already waiting, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark suit. "You look beautiful," he said softly, leading her inside. Alexandra's heart fluttered traitorously. "Remember, Mr. Harrison, we're here to discuss business." "James," he corrected again. "And yes, we are, but that doesn't mean we can't enjoy the evening." As they were seated at a private table with a stunning view of the city, Alexandra couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into dangerous territory. James Harrison was charming, intelligent, and far too attractive for her peace of mind. But more importantly, he held the fate of St. Mary's Hospital in his hands. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, no matter how compelling his smile might be. The restaurant's ambiance was intimate, with soft lighting and classical music playing in the background. James ordered an expensive bottle of wine while Alexandra studied the menu, trying not to react to the astronomical prices. "Order whatever you'd like," James said, noticing her hesitation. "The Wagyu beef is excellent here." "I'm sure it is," Alexandra replied, choosing a more modest option instead. She wouldn't let him think he could impress her with expensive meals. Once they'd ordered, James leaned back, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Tell me more about yourself, Alexandra. How did you end up at St. Mary's?" I thought we were here to discuss the hospital's future. We are, but I like to know who I'm working with. Alexandra took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. After my brother recovered, I knew I wanted to be a nurse. St. Mary's offered me a scholarship for nursing school. I've been there ever since. Loyal, James observed. That's rare these days. Some things are worth being loyal to. She met his gaze steadily. What about you? How does someone end up buying hospitals? A shadow crossed his face. My father built Harrison Healthcare from nothing. When he died last year, I inherited the company. I'm sorry about your father, Alexandra said softly. Don't be. We weren't close. James's tone was clipped. He cared more about expansion than anything else. And you don't? I care about success, he replied. But maybe, he hesitated, maybe I need to redefine what that means. Their food arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. Alexandra watched as James interacted with the staff, noting how he treated them with respect despite his obvious wealth. Your proposals this morning, he said after a while, they're not entirely impossible. Alexandra's heart leaped. You mean you're considering them? I'm considering everything. James set down his fork. The board wants immediate action. They see St. Mary's as a liability. And what do you see? Their eyes met across the table. I'm starting to see something different, he admitted quietly. The intensity of his gaze made Alexandra's pulse quicken. She needed to stay focused on the hospital, not on how handsome he looked in the candlelight. Would you show me more? He asked suddenly. More? Of the hospital, not just the official tour. Show me what it's really like. Work with me for a week. Help me understand what makes it special. Alexandra hesitated. You want to shadow me? Think of it as research, James smiled. I'll even wear scrubs. The image of James Harrison in scrubs almost made her laugh. The great CEO getting his hands dirty? I'm full of surprises. His voice dropped lower. What do you say, Alexandra? She should say no. Having him around would be distracting, complicated. But if it meant saving the hospital, a week, she agreed. But you follow my rules, no special treatment, no executive privileges. Deal. James raised his wine glass. 2 new perspectives. As they clinked glasses, Alexandra couldn't help wondering if she'd just made a huge mistake. James Harrison was dangerous, not because he might destroy the hospital, but because he might destroy her carefully constructed defenses. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly, their conversation flowing easily between hospital business and personal stories. Alexandra found herself laughing at James's dry wit, while he seemed genuinely interested in her experiences as a nurse. When the evening ended, James insisted on having his driver take her home. Standing outside the restaurant, they faced each other awkwardly. Thank you for dinner, Alexandra said formally, trying to maintain professional distance. Thank you for giving me a chance, James replied. His hand brushed hers briefly as he helped her into the car. I'll see you tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp, right? Don't be late, she warned, but couldn't help smiling. As the car pulled away, Alexandra leaned back against the leather seat, her mind spinning. What had she gotten herself into? 1 week with James Harrison could change everything, for the hospital, and for her heart. She just hoped she was strong enough to handle both. At 5:45 a.m. the next morning, Alexandra arrived at St. Mary's to find James already waiting. He looked different in navy blue scrubs, more approachable somehow, though he still carried himself with unmistakable authority. You're early, she remarked, hiding her surprise. I believe in being prepared. He held up 2 coffee cups. I brought reinforcements. Alexandra accepted the coffee gratefully. You'll need it. Morning rounds start in 10 minutes. She led him to the locker room where he stored his expensive watch and phone. First rule, no distractions. When we're with patients, they get our full attention. The day started intensely. Their first patient was a teenage girl recovering from emergency appendectomy, followed by an elderly man with pneumonia. Alexandra watched as James observed her interactions, taking mental notes. How do you remember all their details? He asked between patients. Not just medical information, but personal things? Because they're people, not just cases, she explained. Knowing that Mr. Peterson loves baseball gives us something to talk about during painful procedures. It makes a difference. They were interrupted by a code blue announcement. Alexandra sprinted toward the pediatric ward, James close behind. It was Leo, the young boy from their first tour, having a severe reaction to his chemotherapy. "Get me the crash cart," Alexandra commanded, immediately starting chest compressions. "Leo, stay with us, buddy." James stood frozen for a moment before Alexandra's voice snapped him to attention. "Make yourself useful. Get those supplies from the cabinet." For 20 minutes, they worked to stabilize Leo. James watched in awe as Alexandra remained calm under pressure, coordinating with the medical team while speaking softly to Leo. Finally, the boy's condition stabilized. As other staff members took over, Alexandra stepped back, her hands shaking slightly. "You okay?" James asked quietly. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I just need a minute." He followed her to a quiet corner where she leaned against a wall, closing her eyes. Without thinking, James placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "This is what we do," she said finally, opening her eyes to look at him. "Every day, we fight for people's lives. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but we never stop trying." James's hand dropped, but he stayed close. "You're remarkable," he said softly. The moment was interrupted by Sarah appearing with more patient files. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, giving them a knowing look, "but we have 3 admissions waiting." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of patients, procedures, and paperwork. James shadowed Alexandra closely, asking intelligent questions and even helping with basic tasks. During their lunch break, sitting in the crowded hospital cafeteria, he made notes on potential improvements. "The equipment in the pediatric ward needs updating," he observed. "And the scheduling system is inefficient." "Now you're getting it," Alexandra smiled. "These are the things we've been trying to fix, but you lack resources," he finished. "I think I can help with that." "Really?" She tried not to sound too hopeful. "Really." He looked up from his notes, his expression serious. "Alexandra, They were interrupted by an announcement calling Alexandra to the emergency room. She stood quickly. "Duty calls, you coming?" James followed, his unfinished sentence hanging between them. In the ER, they found a young mother cradling a crying infant. "She's burning up," the mother explained tearfully. "We don't have insurance, but someone said you might help." Alexandra immediately took charge, examining the baby while reassuring the mother. James watched her work, noting how she managed to be both professional and compassionate. After ensuring the baby received proper care, Alexandra helped the mother fill out financial assistance forms. "We'll figure something out," she promised. "No one gets turned away here." Later, as their shift wound down, James was unusually quiet. "Having second thoughts about hospital work?" Alexandra teased. "No," he replied thoughtfully. "Just realizing how much I have to learn." They stepped outside into the evening air, both exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. "Same time tomorrow?" James asked. Alexandra nodded, then hesitated. "Thank you for today, for trying to understand. Thank you for showing me." He stepped closer, and for a moment, Alexandra thought he might say more. Instead, he simply smiled. "Get some rest, Alexandra. Tomorrow will be another busy day." As she watched him walk away, Alexandra realized that James Harrison was nothing like she'd expected. The question was, what did that mean for St. Mary's, and for her? The next few days fell into a rhythm. Every morning, James arrived early with coffee, and together they faced whatever challenges the hospital presented. His presence was becoming dangerously familiar. On their 4th day together, they encountered their biggest challenge yet. A major traffic accident brought multiple trauma patients to the ER simultaneously. "We need more hands," Dr. Thompson shouted as ambulances arrived. "Morgan, take Trauma Bay 3. Alexandra rushed to help a young accident victim, while James assisted wherever he could, passing supplies and helping move patients. Hours passed in a blur of activity. When things finally calmed down, Alexandra found James in the break room, his scrubs stained with blood. "You did well today," she said, collapsing into a chair beside him. "I just followed your lead." He handed her a bottle of water. "How do you handle days like this?" "We have to. People depend on us." She took a long drink. "No, usually we're better staffed." James's expression turned thoughtful. "The shortage of nurses is a serious issue." "One of many." Alexandra stretched her tired muscles. "But we make do." "You shouldn't have to just make do," James said firmly. "I've been looking at the numbers again. With some reorganization." He was interrupted by a knock on the door. Sarah entered, looking apologetic. "Alex, Leo's asking for you." His fever's up again." Alexandra immediately stood, but James caught her arm. "You've been going for hours." "Take a break." "I can't," she said softly. "Leo needs me." James watched her go, admiration and something deeper flickering in his eyes. In Leo's room, Alexandra found the boy pale but smiling weakly. "Miss Alex, where's Mr. James?" "Taking a break," she replied, checking his temperature. "He's had a busy day." "He's nice," Leo declared. "Different from when we first met him." Alexandra smiled, adjusting his blankets. "People can surprise you. Is he your boyfriend?" The question caught her off guard. "No, sweetie, he's just helping me at the hospital. But he looks at you like my dad used to look at my mom," Leo said innocently. "Before she went to heaven." Alexandra felt her cheeks warm. "Try to rest, Leo. I'll check on you later." Leaving the room, she nearly collided with James, who was carrying fresh ice chips for Leo. "Everything okay?" he asked, noting her flushed face. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." But as their eyes met, the air between them seemed to charge with unspoken emotions. James stepped closer, his free hand reaching for hers. "Alexandra, Dr. Thompson needs you in ICU," a nurse called out, hurrying past. The moment shattered. Alexandra stepped back, professional mask sliding back into place. "We should get back to work," she said briskly. James nodded, but his eyes held a promise of unfinished business. That evening, as they prepared to leave, James stopped her in the parking lot. "Have dinner with me again," he said. "Not to discuss business this time." Alexandra's heart raced. "James, I don't think—" "Just dinner," he insisted. "I think we both know this is more than just about the hospital now." She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. It would be so easy to say yes, to let herself fall. "I can't," she whispered. "There's too much at stake." "Alexandra!" "Good night, Mr. Harrison." She turned and walked quickly to her car, refusing to look back at his expression. But that night, alone in her apartment, Alexandra couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he jumped in to help during the emergency, how gentle he was with patients, how his eyes softened when he looked at her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Stop overthinking. Sometimes good things happen in unexpected ways." Alexandra stared at the message, wondering if her friend was right. Could she trust James Harrison with both the hospital and her heart? Or was she setting herself up for double heartbreak? The 5th day of their agreement brought unexpected challenges. Alexandra arrived to find James in an intense phone conversation outside the hospital. "The board cannot make that decision without me," he was saying firmly. "I need more time." He ended the call when he saw her, but his expression remained troubled. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just business." He handed her the usual coffee. "Shall we begin?" Throughout the morning, Alexandra noticed James checking his phone more frequently than usual. Something was clearly wrong, but he deflected her questions with practiced ease. During their rounds, they visited Mrs. Chen, the rehabilitation patient. She was making remarkable progress, taking stronger steps each day. "It's because of you," Mrs. Chen told Alexandra. "You gave me hope when everyone else said I wouldn't walk again." James watched the interaction intently. "How did you know she could recover?" "I didn't," Alexandra admitted. "But I knew she deserved the chance to try." Later, they checked on Leo, who was doing better after his fever scare. The boy's face lit up when he saw them. "Mr. James, did you bring any new games?" James smiled, producing a tablet from his bag. "Better. I got permission to install a gaming system in the children's ward. Want to help me pick which games to get?" As Leo excitedly listed his favorites, Alexandra observed James. He was different from the cold businessman who'd first walked into St. Mary's, but something was still bothering him. During their lunch break, his phone rang again. This time he couldn't hide his frustration. "I need to take this," he said, stepping away. Alexandra couldn't help overhearing parts of the conversation. "The decision is premature. No, I won't authorize it. I don't care about the shareholders right now." When he returned, his face was grim. "Want to tell me what's really going on?" she asked softly. James ran a hand through his hair. "The board is pushing for immediate action on St. Mary's. They're threatening to override my authority if I don't proceed with the original restructuring plan." Alexandra felt her heart sink. "When?" "They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." He met her eyes. "I'm trying to stop it, but you're just one person," she finished. "Alexandra, An emergency call interrupted them. A pregnant woman had collapsed in the parking lot. They rushed to help, professional instincts taking over. The woman was experiencing severe preeclampsia, requiring immediate intervention. Alexandra coordinated with the obstetrics team while James helped move the patient. For 2 hours, they worked to stabilize both mother and unborn child. Finally, the crisis passed. The woman would need monitoring, but both lives were saved. "That was incredible," James said as they left the patient's room. "How you handled everything, kept everyone calm." "It's what we do here," Alexandra replied. "Every life matters." James stopped walking, turning to face her. "I know, I see it now, more clearly than ever." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Alexandra, about tomorrow." "Don't," she interrupted. "Please don't make promises you can't keep." "Look at me," he said softly. When she did, his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm not the same person who walked into this hospital 5 days ago. You changed that." "James." Before either could say more, Sarah appeared around the corner. "Alex, emergency in pediatrics." They sprang apart, the moment broken. As Alexandra hurried away, she heard James's phone ring yet again. That evening, as their shift ended, tension hung heavy between them. "The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow," James said. "I'll do everything I can." Alexandra nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Whatever happens," he continued, "these days with you, they've meant more than you know." She finally looked at him, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "Prove it," she whispered, then turned and walked away. In her car, Alexandra finally let her tears fall. She had let herself hope, let herself believe James Harrison could change. Tomorrow would reveal if that hope had been misplaced. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and cold. Alexandra arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, finding comfort in her routine. She wasn't surprised to see that James wasn't waiting with coffee. He would be preparing for the meeting. "Any word?" Sarah asked when she arrived. Alexandra shook her head. "The meeting starts at 9, that's all I know. He'll do the right thing," Sarah said confidently. "Will he?" Alexandra sighed. "He's still a businessman, Sarah. The board has power over him." They were interrupted by a commotion in the pediatric ward. Leo was having another bad reaction to his treatment. For the next hour, Alexandra focused solely on stabilizing her young patient. As his condition improved, she heard whispers that the board meeting had begun. "Miss Alex," Leo said weakly. "Where's Mr. James?" "He had an important meeting today," she explained, adjusting his IV. "Is he going to help save our hospital?" Alexandra's heart clenched. "I hope so, sweetie." Meanwhile, in the boardroom, James faced the hostile faces of his directors. "The numbers are clear," Gordon Weber, the senior board member, was saying. "St. Mary's is a financial drain. Your father would never have allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment." James clenched his jaw at the mention of his father. "My father didn't see everything." "We gave you time to evaluate," another director added. "Your conclusion was correct initially. The facility needs complete restructuring." "I was wrong," James stated firmly. "St. Mary's provides essential services to this community. With proper management—" "We've seen the proposals," Weber interrupted. "They're idealistic and impractical. This isn't a charity, Mr. Harrison." "No," James agreed, standing. "It's a healthcare facility, one that saves lives every day." He began presenting the data he'd gathered during his week at the hospital. Patient outcomes, community impact, the true cost of losing such a vital resource. "The problem isn't the hospital," he argued. "It's our approach. We've been measuring success purely in financial terms." "Because we're a business," Weber snapped. "We're in the business of saving lives," James countered. "And I've seen firsthand what that really means." He thought of Alexandra, of her dedication and compassion, of Leo's brave smile and Mrs. Chen's determination. "I have a new proposal," he announced, "to preserve St. Mary's mission while making it financially sustainable." The board members exchanged skeptical glances as James outlined his plan. It was ambitious, involving significant investment from Harrison Healthcare and partnerships with local businesses. "This is your father's company," Weber reminded him. "You have a responsibility to shareholders." James smiled coldly. "Actually, as CEO and majority shareholder, my primary responsibility is to do what's right. And this is right." "We'll need to vote," another director said. "Vote then," James replied. "But know this, If you vote against my proposal, I'll take this public. Every detail about how this board tried to destroy a vital community hospital. I'm sure the press will be very interested." The threat hung in the air. James's reputation for following through was well known. Hours passed at the hospital while the board deliberated. Alexandra tried to stay focused on her patients, but anxiety gnawed at her. At 2 o'clock, she was called to the emergency room for a critical case. As she worked to save an accident victim, she pushed all thoughts of the board meeting aside. She was just finishing up when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found James standing there, still in his suit but looking exhausted. "Well?" she asked, her heart pounding. His face gave nothing away as he stepped closer. "The board has made their decision." For a moment, time seemed to freeze as Alexandra waited for James's next words. The bustling emergency room faded into background noise. Finally, James's serious expression broke into a smile. "He accepted my proposal. St. Mary stays as it is, with some improvements." Alexandra felt her knees weaken with relief. "Really? Really?" His eyes sparkled. "Though I may have had to threaten them a little." Before she could respond, a blur of movement caught their attention. Leo, who should have been in his room, was wheeling himself toward them as fast as his arms could manage. "Mr. James, did you save our hospital?" he called out. James knelt beside the wheelchair. "Yes, Leo, the hospital is safe." The boy threw his arms around James's neck, not caring about wrinkling the expensive suit. "I knew you would. Miss Alex said you were a good person." Alexandra felt her cheeks flush as James looked up at her, his expression soft. "Did she now?" "Leo, you should be resting," Alexandra said quickly, trying to regain her composure. "But I wanted to know what happened," Leo protested. Everyone was worried. News of the board's decision spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members stopped James in the hallways to thank him, while patients and their families expressed relief. Later, in a quiet moment, James found Alexandra in the break room. "There's more," he said, sitting beside her. "The board approved a significant investment in updating equipment and hiring additional staff. We're also establishing a charitable foundation to support patients who can't afford care." Alexandra stared at him. "You did all that?" "I had a good teacher." His hand found hers on the table. "Someone showed me what really matters." The touch of his fingers sent warmth through her arm. "James, I'm not finished," he interrupted softly. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Harrison Healthcare." "What?" Alexandra pulled her hand back in shock. "Hey, would you do that?" "Because I want to focus on what's important. I'm creating a new division specifically for community hospitals like St. Mary's. It will be smaller, but more meaningful." He caught her hand again, holding it firmly. "And I was hoping you would help me run it." Alexandra's mind raced. "Me? But I'm just a nurse." "You're never just anything, Alexandra Morgan. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You showed me how to be better, how to make a real difference." The intensity in his eyes made her heart race. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Maybe," he smiled. "But sometimes crazy works." Their moment was interrupted by Sarah bursting into the break room. "Alex!" "Oh, sorry," she grinned, seeing their joined hands. "But you need to come see this." They followed her to the pediatric ward, where a crowd had gathered. The new gaming system James had promised was being installed, and Leo was holding court from his wheelchair, explaining all the features to other young patients. "See?" he announced proudly. "I told you Mr. James would make things better." James squeezed Alexandra's hand. Smart kid. As they watched the children's excitement, Alexandra felt something settle in her heart. The hospital was safe, but more than that, she had witnessed a true transformation, not just of St. Mary's, but of the man beside her. "Have dinner with me tonight," James murmured. "No business talk, no hospital plans, just us." This time, Alexandra didn't hesitate. "Yes." His smile was brilliant. "I should warn you, I'm not quite the cold businessman you first met." "Good," she replied, "because I think I'm falling for the man you've become." The following weeks brought dramatic changes to St. Mary's Hospital. New equipment arrived, additional staff were hired, and renovations began in several departments. But the most significant change was the growing relationship between Alexandra and James. One evening, as they left the hospital together, James seemed unusually nervous. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to his car. "Where are we going?" Alexandra asked as they drove through the city. "You'll see." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. A for sale sign stood in the front yard. "What do you think?" James asked, watching her reaction. Alexandra looked confused. "About what?" "The house. It's closer to the hospital than my current place. The neighborhood is nice, good schools nearby." "James Harrison?" Alexandra turned to face him. "Are you thinking about moving out of your penthouse?" He shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Maybe it's time for a change. Less luxury, more home." "And the good schools?" She raised an eyebrow. "Well," he smiled, taking her hand, "I thought we might need them someday." Alexandra's heart skipped. They hadn't discussed the future explicitly, but their relationship had grown stronger each day. "Want to look inside?" he asked. The house was charming, hardwood floors, large windows, a backyard perfect for children. As they toured each room, James pointed out potential improvements. "The kitchen needs updating, but I thought you might have ideas about that," he said. "And this room would make a great nursery." Alexandra stopped walking. "James," he turned to face her, suddenly serious. "Too much, too soon?" "No," she said softly. "It's just, are you sure? This is very different from your usual lifestyle." James pulled her close. "Alexandra, the past few months have taught me what really matters. I don't need a penthouse or expensive cars. I need you. I need this. A real home, a future we build together." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Leo's father appeared. "He's asking for both of you. Good day for visitors." They headed straight to the hospital. Leo had been responding well to his latest treatment, but he still had difficult days. "Miss Alex, Mr. James." Leo's face lit up when they entered. "Did you bring any new games?" "Better," James smiled, pulling out a tablet. "How would you like to help design the new children's ward?" For the next hour, they looked at different designs together, Leo offering enthusiastic suggestions about colors and themes. "Will there be a special room for playing games?" he asked. "Of course," Alexandra assured him. "And an area for art therapy and maybe even a small library?" "Cool." Leo paused, then asked seriously, "Will you and Mr. James get married before it's finished?" James choked on his water while Alexandra turned bright red. "Leo?" His father scolded, but the boy looked unrepentant. "Well, everyone says you're going to. Sarah says it's just a matter of time." James recovered first, glancing at Alexandra with a mischievous smile. "Does she now? Time for rest, young man," Alexandra said firmly, though her cheeks were still flushed. As they left Leo's room, James took her hand. "He has a point, you know." "About what?" "About it being just a matter of time." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I love you, Alexandra Morgan. I think I have since that first day you challenged me in my office." Alexandra's heart soared, but she managed a teasing smile. "Even when I was yelling at you?" "Especially then." He pulled her closer. "You showed me what courage looks like, what it means to fight for what matters. You changed my life." "You changed too," she whispered. "You chose to be better. Because of you." He touched her cheek gently. "So what do you say? Should we make Leo's prediction come true?" Alexandra pretended to consider. "Are you actually proposing, Mr. Harrison?" "Not yet," he grinned. "When I do, it'll be properly romantic. This is more of a preliminary negotiations." "Businessman to the end," she laughed, then grew serious. "I love you too, James." His kiss was gentle but full of promise, right there in the hospital corridor where their story began. 3 months later, St. Mary's Hospital was almost unrecognizable. The renovations were nearly complete, new programs were in place, and patient satisfaction was at an all-time high. The Harrison Community Healthcare Initiative, with Alexandra as its director, was already expanding to help other hospitals in need. James had officially moved into the house they'd visited, though Alexandra maintained her own apartment, for now. They spent most evenings together, planning hospital improvements or simply enjoying each other's company. One particularly busy morning, Alexandra was reviewing staffing schedules when Sarah burst into her office. "Leo's test results are back," she announced breathlessly. Alexandra's heart stopped. They'd been waiting for these results for weeks. Racing to the pediatric ward, they found Leo and his father with Dr. Thompson. James was already there, having been in a meeting nearby. "Tell them!" Leo was bouncing in his wheelchair, unable to contain himself. Dr. Thompson smiled. "The treatment worked. Leo is in remission." The room erupted in joy. Leo's father broke down crying, while Leo himself demanded a wheelchair race to celebrate. "Not so fast, young man." Alexandra laughed through her own tears. "You still need to build up your strength." "But I'm going to get better now, right?" Leo asked. "I can go back to school and everything?" "Yes," Dr. Thompson confirmed, "though we'll need regular checkup." James, who had been quietly watching, stepped forward. "I think this calls for a celebration. How about a party in the new children's ward? We can make it its unofficial opening." Leo's eyes widened. "Can we invite everyone? All the nurses and doctors and other kids?" "Of course," James smiled. "It's your party." Later that evening, as they left the hospital, James seemed distracted. "Everything okay?" Alexandra asked. "Perfect," he replied. "Actually, I was hoping you'd have dinner with me tonight. There's something I want to discuss." They drove to La Maison, the restaurant where they'd had their first real dinner together. Alexandra noticed James was unusually nervous, fidgeting with his tie. After they ordered, he reached across the table for her hand. "You remember our first time here?" he asked. "Of course. You were trying to convince me you weren't a heartless businessman. And did I succeed?" Alexandra pretended to think. "Eventually." James smiled, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "That night changed my life," he said softly. "You changed my life. Before you, I was just going through the motions, following my father's path. But you showed me there was more. More to life, more to success, more to love." He stood, and Alexandra's heart began to race as he moved to kneel beside her chair. "Alexandra Morgan," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. "You make me want to be better every day. You challenge me, inspire me, and love me despite my flaws. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful but understated, exactly what she would have chosen. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the man before her, so different from the cold CEO she'd first met. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted around them. Turning, Alexandra saw familiar faces: Sarah, Dr. Thompson, Leo and his father, and many other hospital staff members emerging from hidden corners of the restaurant. "You planned this?" she accused James, laughing through her tears. "Guilty," he admitted, though Leo nearly ruined the surprise twice. "It was hard keeping a secret," Leo called out, wheeling over to hug them both. The evening turned into an impromptu engagement party, filled with joy and celebration. As Alexandra looked around at the faces of people who had become family, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Happy?" James murmured, wrapping his arms around her. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into him. The wedding planning took on a life of its own. Instead of the lavish society event James's social circle expected, they chose to hold the ceremony in St. Mary's newly renovated garden, a space designed for patient recovery that had become one of Alexandra's favorite projects. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked one day, as they reviewed decoration plans. "You could have any venue in the city." "This feels right," Alexandra replied. "This place brought us together. Plus, our patients can attend without traveling." Leo had already appointed himself chief wedding planner, taking his role very seriously. "We need lots of flowers," he insisted during one planning session. "And games for the kids who come. And can I be the ring bearer?" "Wouldn't have it any other way," James smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. As the wedding day approached, Alexandra found James in his office late one evening, looking at old photographs. "What's that?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "Pictures of my parents' wedding," he said quietly. It was a huge society event. Everyone who was anyone attended. But looking at these now, no one's really smiling. It was all for show. Alexandra wrapped her arms around him. "Having second thoughts about our garden wedding?" "Never." He turned to face her. "Our wedding will be full of real smiles, real joy. That's what matters." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The hospital garden had been transformed, with flowers and twinkling lights. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, many equipped with medical support for patients who wanted to attend. In the bridal room, which was actually a converted hospital office, Sarah helped Alexandra with her dress, an elegant but simple design that allowed her to move freely. "You know," Sarah grinned, "when you stormed into Harrison's office that first day, I never thought it would lead to this." "Neither did I," Alexandra laughed. "I was ready to fight him. And now you're marrying him. Life's funny that way." A knock at the door revealed Leo, dapper in his little suit. "Miss Alex!" "Everyone's ready." The ceremony was everything they'd hoped for. Patients watched from windows and wheelchairs. Hospital staff filled the seats alongside James's business associates. All differences forgotten in the celebration. Leo proudly wheeled himself down the aisle, ring pillow balanced carefully on his lap. When he reached the front, James helped him stand, one of his newest achievements in physical therapy, to hand over the rings. As they exchanged vows, Alexandra and James kept their words personal and honest. "You taught me that true strength isn't about power or money," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about having the courage to care, to change, to love. I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of the love you've given me." Alexandra's voice trembled as she responded. "You showed me that sometimes the biggest challenges bring the greatest gifts. I promise to stand by you, challenge you when needed, and love you always." The reception was unlike any society wedding the city had seen. Patients mingled with CEOs, children played games alongside corporate lawyers, medical equipment stood discreetly nearby, ensuring everyone could participate safely. "This is perfect," James murmured as they danced their first dance. "Exactly what a celebration should be." "Even though there are IV poles on the dance floor," Alexandra teased. "Especially because of that," he smiled. "It's real. It's us." Later, as they cut the cake, Leo made an announcement that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Dr. Thompson says I can start school next month," he declared proudly. "And guess what? I want to be a doctor when I grow up, just like the ones here who helped me get better." James pulled the boy into a hug. "I think you'll make an excellent doctor." As the evening wound down, Alexandra and James took a moment alone in the garden. "Happy?" she asked, echoing his question from their engagement night. "More than I knew was possible," he replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for fighting for what mattered, the hospital, the patients, us." "Thank you for being worth fighting for," she whispered back. 1 year after their wedding, St. Mary's Hospital had become a model for community healthcare across the country. The Harrison Community Healthcare Initiative had expanded to help 10 other hospitals, with more in the planning stages. Alexandra and James had settled into their renovated house, turning it into the home they'd dreamed of. But their biggest change was yet to come. One morning, Alexandra found herself feeling unusually tired during rounds. After several days of this, Sarah cornered her in the break room. "Okay, spill it," she demanded. "What's going on?" Alexandra smiled nervously. "I took a test this morning. I'm pregnant." Sarah's squeal of delight could probably be heard throughout the hospital. "Does James know yet?" "Not yet. I want to tell him in a special way." That evening, Alexandra arranged to meet James in Leo's old room in the pediatric ward, now transformed into a cheerful space for young patients. "I'm here," James asked when he arrived. Alexandra took his hand, placing it on her stomach. "Because this room is where everything changed. Where you first showed me your heart. And now," she smiled, "it's where I tell you we're going to have a baby." James's face transformed with joy. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around before suddenly stopping. "Should I not do that? Is it safe? Do you need to sit down?" Alexandra laughed. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." The news spread quickly through the hospital. Leo, now in regular school but still a frequent visitor, appointed himself honorary big brother. "I can teach the baby all about the hospital," he declared, "and about how you and Mr. James fell in love here." As Alexandra's pregnancy progressed, James became adorably overprotective. He installed comfortable chairs in every department she worked in and insisted on hiring additional staff to reduce her workload. "I'm fine," she would assure him. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years." "None of them were my wife," he'd reply, kissing her forehead. 6 months into the pregnancy, during a routine ultrasound, they received surprising news. "Twins!" the technician announced cheerfully. James, who had been holding Alexandra's hand, nearly fainted. "2 babies?" he whispered, looking both terrified and thrilled. "Like double the blessing," Leo said wisely when they told him. He had come far in his recovery, now only using his wheelchair on very tired days. The preparation for the twins became a hospital-wide project. Staff members offered advice and hand-me-downs, while James threw himself into researching everything about twin pregnancies. One evening, as they sat in their backyard, James spoke softly. "I've been thinking about names." "Oh?" "If they're girls, I thought maybe Hope and Grace." Alexandra smiled, understanding the significance. And if they're boys? Leo, for one of them, James said without hesitation. For the boy who helped change my life. Perfect, Alexandra agreed, tears in her eyes. Damn pregnancy hormones. The twins arrived 2 weeks early, demanding attention from the start. A boy and a girl, both healthy and strong. Leo and Hope Harrison, Alexandra whispered, holding her son while James cradled their daughter. The hospital celebrated the births as if the twins were everyone's family, which, in a way, they were. Leo was the first visitor, proudly wearing a Big Brother t-shirt James had given him. Now they'll get to grow up seeing all the good things you and Mr. James do, he said, peering at the babies. Just like I did. In the months following the twins' birth, Alexandra and James found their rhythm as parents while continuing their work at St. Mary's. The hospital had installed a state-of-the-art daycare center, allowing them to keep the babies close while working. One morning, James found Alexandra in the nursery, rocking Hope while Leo entertained baby Leo with a storybook. Remember the first time I walked into this hospital? James asked, leaning against the doorframe. How could I forget? Alexandra smiled. You were so cold and businesslike, I wanted to strangle you. And now look at us. He gestured to their makeshift family scene. Leo, now almost fully recovered, had become like a son to them, spending countless hours at their house in the hospital. Big change is coming, James continued, sitting beside them. The initiative is expanding again. 3 more hospitals have reached out for help. Alexandra looked up sharply. Will you need to travel? We'll need to, he corrected. But I was thinking, what if we made it a family journey? What do you mean? The twins are 6 months old now. Leo's on summer break. Why not turn these hospital visits into family trips? Show the kids what their parents do, why it matters. Can I really come? Leo asked excitedly, looking up from his book. If your dad agrees, James smiled. You're our expert consultant on children's wards after all. The first trip was to a small hospital in a coastal town. The twins, strapped to their parents' chests, attended meetings and tours. Leo charmed everyone with his insights on making hospitals more child-friendly. See these games? He explained to the hospital board. They help me get through tough days. Every kid needs that. During their free time, they explored the town as a family. James taught Leo to build sandcastles while Alexandra watched from under an umbrella, the twins napping peacefully beside her. This is what success really looks like, James said that evening, watching the sunset over the ocean. Not money or power, but moments like this. Back at St. Mary's, they continued their work with renewed energy. The twins grew quickly, becoming familiar faces around the hospital. Hope had James's determined expression, while little Leo had his mother's compassionate eyes. One day they received unexpected news. Leo's latest scans showed he was completely cancer-free. 5 years in remission, Dr. Thompson announced proudly. You've beaten it, young man. The celebration that followed was hospital-wide. During the party, Leo made an announcement. I got accepted into the junior volunteer program, he said proudly. I want to start learning how to help people, like you all helped me. James hugged the boy tightly. You already help people more than you know. Later that night, after putting the twins to bed, Alexandra found James in their home office, looking thoughtful. Penny for your thoughts? She asked, wrapping her arms around him. I was just thinking about legacy, he replied. My father wanted me to build an empire. Instead, I found something better. A family, a purpose, love. Having regrets? Never. He pulled her closer. Every choice that led me to you, to our children, to this life, they were all perfect. 5 years later, St. Mary's Hospital had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The Harrison Community Healthcare Initiative now supported dozens of hospitals nationwide, each following the model of compassionate care that Alexandra and James had built. The twins were now active 5-year-olds, often seen running through the hospital corridors in designated safe areas only, as Alexandra insisted. Hope had inherited her father's business sense, already setting up a hospital for her stuffed animals, while little Leo showed his mother's nurturing spirit, always trying to help others. Leo, now a teenager, had become an integral part of their family. His volunteer work at the hospital had evolved into a structured internship program for young people interested in healthcare, which he helped design. One spring morning, the family gathered in the hospital garden, the same place where Alexandra and James had married. And they were celebrating multiple milestones. Leo's acceptance to medical school, the twins' first day of kindergarten, and the 10th anniversary of James taking over St. Mary's. "I have something to share," Alexandra announced, holding James's hand. "We're expanding the family again." The news was met with jubilation. The twins jumped up and down, excited about becoming big siblings, while Leo grinned knowingly. He'd suspected when Alexandra started craving the same odd combinations she'd wanted during her previous pregnancy. "Boy or girl?" Hope demanded. "Well, we don't know yet, sweetheart," James laughed. "But either way, they'll be perfect." Later that evening, as they walked through the hospital halls, Alexandra and James stopped at the spot where they'd first met, outside his old office. "Remember how angry you were?" James teased. "Remember how arrogant you were?" she countered. "Thank God for second chances," he murmured, pulling her close. They were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison." It was Mrs. Chen, now leading the hospital's physical therapy support group. "We need your help with something." In the rehabilitation room, they found a gathering of patients, staff, and families, all people whose lives had been touched by St. Mary's over the years. "We wanted to show you something," Leo said, stepping forward. He unveiled a large photo wall, displaying hundreds of pictures documenting the hospital's journey. In the center was the article that had started it all: Harrison CEO transforms community healthcare. "This isn't just a hospital anymore," Leo continued. "It's a family, and it all started because two people were brave enough to change." James wrapped his arm around Alexandra, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. "No," he corrected gently. "It started because one remarkable woman refused to give up on what mattered. And because one man was willing to open his heart," Alexandra added. As they looked at the photos, their wedding, the twins' birth, countless moments of healing and hope, they saw their life's work reflected back at them. St. Mary's had become more than they'd ever dreamed, touching thousands of lives. That night, as they tucked the twins into bed, Hope asked, "Daddy, tell us again how you and Mommy fell in love." James smiled at Alexandra. "Well, it all started when your mother stormed into my office, ready to fight for what she believed in. And your father," Alexandra continued, "learned that the greatest business success is measured in lives changed and hearts touched." As they left the children's room, James pulled Alexandra close. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For showing me what really matters. For our family. For everything." Alexandra kissed him softly. "Thank you for being worth fighting for." Outside their window, St. Mary's Hospital stood proudly against the night sky, its lights a beacon of hope for the community. Inside, a family built on love, compassion, and second chances looked toward their future, knowing that the greatest successes in life come not from what we gain, but from what we give.